like it or not, American taxpayers are funding the gender affirming care movement in the United States, even though the European nations that started this craze and spearheaded it are actually moving away from the hormone treatments and also the surgeries, because it's been found overseas in a wide ranging longitudinal study that gender affirming care actually produces a higher rate of suicidality within those patients who are receiving it. But in the United States, we're still operating under the old paradigm, and the shift was recent, but it's not so long ago that there hasn't been enough time for America to catch up. And so I want to talk to you right now about this pediatrician group. This is here in the US. They're looking at whether or not this actually works for students. It's a review of 60 studies in the mental health of transgender identifying youth. They found that there is no long term evidence that current gender affirming medication and surgical protocols benefit their mental well being. The American College of Pediatricians is issuing a position statement on Wednesday. This is Wednesday of last week, and they oppose the gender transitioning of youth based on the review of the literature. It comes just after a watchdog group filed a scientific integrity complaint against the Department of Health and Human Services. They filed it specifically against Rachel Levine for claiming that there's no argument among medical professionals regarding the value and importance of gender affirming care. All of this is happening against a backdrop of thousands of young people who have been subjected to gender affirming care who are seeking to reverse this process. It's happening in America, but only overseas are they doing actual news stories about it. And so I want you to take a look at hundreds of young trans people who are seeking help to return to their original sex. This is happening overseas. The movement is also going on here in the US, but without as much fanfare. Watch this.
Ruby began identifying as male at 13 years old. Now 21, she'd been planning to have surgery to remove her breasts. But in May, she made the decision to come off testosterone and detransition to identify as female, her sex at birth. She doesn't want to be identified, so we've changed her name.
I figured it would be better for me to try to deal with my gender dysphoria in a different way, rather than permanently changing my body.
How much support did you feel was out there for you when you came to this conclusion?
I didn't feel like there was any support out there other than like a few friends online.
Ruby now feels her eating disorder was more of a factor than she first realised in her gender dysphoria.
None of the therapists that I spoke to brought that up. They didn't think that it was linked.
Do you?
I think so, yes, because they're both kind of based in how I feel about my body, so I've seen similarities between the two.
Charlie Evans is forming a charity to support people in Ruby's position. After going public with her detransition story, she discovered an online community of 5,000 in a similar position, 30 people alone in her area of Newcastle.
I was approached by a young woman with a beard, and she hugged me and said, I'm a detransitioned woman as well, I've just stopped taking testosterone. And after that, I felt like I had to do something.
So you see there that these are young people who had members of their family, they had the support of their family, they had the support of the medical community to make physical changes to their body. And when she talks about the subject of that news piece, talks about being approached by a young woman who is wearing a beard, who's coming off of the testosterone, the harsh reality of the taking of the puberty blockers during the years when your body is forming its permanent condition is that often these young women are left with the heavy jawline, Adam's apple, lower voiced intonation, and facial hair, bigger shoulders, broader shoulders, things that are typical for a male body. They have to live with these realities for the rest of their life, even though they've come out of the mental condition that made them feel that they were in the wrong body. So to make these kinds of changes on a physical body that is growing through puberty, and also the ensuing sterilization that comes from the drugs that are being given, the puberty blockers actually sterilize so that you can't have children later. So the decision is permanent for you, even though the mental condition may not be. And there's also the self-harm that comes along with it. I mentioned that. Over at the Daily Wire, they're covering that nearly 45% of trans identifying people had serious psychological distress in the last month. This is a survey. Nearly a third of those same individuals had also been homeless. So they're leaving their home. They're suffering from depression. They're already feeling mental illness. And the trans identifying individuals polled in a recently released US survey are talking about serious psychological distress. Half of them, 44% of those surveyed said they experienced serious psychological distress in the last 30 days. And the study is called the US Transgender Survey from the National Center for Transgender Equality. It was conducted from 2022. This was between the months of October 19th and December 5th. So, what am I saying here? Well, the first thing is, why would we have someone in charge of the very organization that would make these decisions on the government level be someone who's suffering from the same thing? Rachel Levine is in charge of the policy that comes from the federal government in this area. And the reason why the American Academy of Pediatrics is suing this person is because he's a man who believes he is a woman. And when he's asked about this, he dodges the question. He only says, and I quote, accredited medical professional groups agree that gender affirming care is medically necessary, which means that the Department of Health and Human Services is run by an individual who's suffering from a type of a mental illness, which means that his policy surrounding that same mental illness that he suffers from does not comport with that of now leading experts in the field and survey data that spans years and years and years. I mentioned 60 studies. This is not 60 studies from the year 2022. This is 60 studies spanning decades where they've watched children and then adults through to their elderly years on how they have lived, how their mental illness has progressed, their mental health in total, their physical health. They've looked at all aspects of their lives to try to figure out what the best thing is for them and whether or not the things that are being done, the treatments, the hormone blockers, the surgeries, if any of those things are helpful, because that's the suite of gender affirming care that term covers a whole host of things that can be done on behalf of and to a person who declares that they are in the wrong body. So looking at who we have leading DHS, Rachel Levine, a man who's suffering from the very illness that Health and Human Services creates policy surrounding, and the issue that he really is facing himself, but not dealing with, it's no wonder that we're still looking at gender affirming care here in the US when other countries have moved on from that in Europe. And the studies show that it's actually the exact opposite of what these kids need. So I want to have a moment every single time there's an opportunity to discuss this truth to empower parents to do what's right for your child. Don't listen to the experts because in this case, they're years behind their European counterparts. We'll be back with more now after this.